I understand that the actual name for Max's car is called the Interceptor. It has been ever since 1979 with the original Mad Max. But why in the hell in this game do they refer to it as the Black on Black? I mean, they may have referred to it in some of those older movies, which I unfortunately have not been able to watch recently. I don't remember them calling it Black on Black in Mad Max Fury Road, but they call it the Black on Black in this game, which can make for an abundance of racially and sexually charged jokes. So yeah, whatever you do not Google image search that. Just don't. Hello everyone, David here. So on September 1st, we had this game that came out and was just changing the perspective of everybody when it came to gaming. It was getting rave reviews. A lot of people were trying to pay attention to it, and that was Metal Gear Solid 5. But that's not what this review is about. This review is about the game that came out on that very same day, but you gotta give credit to the developers and the publishers for not backing out and having the balls to go up against Metal Gear Solid 5, and that is Avalanche Studios' Mad Max video game, which is kind of like both a reboot and a sequel to Mad Max Fury Road, because the story behind this game is that Max is trying to reach this area of the wasteland called the Plains of Silence. What exactly he hopes to find there kind of remains ambiguous throughout the game, but this is the destination that he has his sights set on. But in order to do that, he needs the help of his trusty car, the Interceptor. Unfortunately, on the way there, he gets ambushed by the evil warlord Scrotus and his horde of war boys. And it being that this is the wasteland, they jack him of everything. His clothes, his weapons, his car, his beloved car that he really needs. So ultimately, he makes it his mission to get the Interceptor back so that he can reach the Plains of Silence. And the story takes a few minor turns here and there, but mainly later on in the game after an abundance of side characters get introduced and Max comes across them. And the story for this game is rather light, but what makes it interesting is the fact that it's kind of like both a reboot and a sequel, because Scrotus is actually the son of Immortan Joe, who is the main villain in Fury Road. So that's why I'm begging the question, is this a sequel, but at the same time kind of a reboot, because Max is not necessarily modeled after Tom Hardy or Mel Gibson for that matter. So this is kind of like Avalanche Studios' own take on the character, while at the same time paying attention to the continuity of Fury Road, which came out the same year. And much like Fury Road, the story is not necessarily that deep. I mean, as much as I love that movie, I acknowledge the fact that, I even stated in my review, that the movie, when it comes down to its story, is practically one long chase sequence from beginning to end. It's like one big chase sequence. But of course, ever so often they make a couple pit stops, they meet some new characters, they stop to ponder and have some beats with these characters in terms of their development or their motivation, that kind of thing. But in terms of the grand picture, it's literally our characters going from point A to point B, and it's almost a similar thing with the story for the Mad Max video game, in which Max, after that initial premise of having the Interceptor being stolen from him and him trying to build this brand new car so that he can then get his old car back after entering the Gastown races, it mainly becomes a matter of objectives. Not so much the story, but a matter of objectives of getting from point A to point B, getting this one thing for this one other person, and that person helping out Max. But much like Fury Road, it's about the characters and about the environment and about how the civilization has gone to shit after whatever ravaged the world, whether it be nuclear fallout and the seas just evaporating. That's what makes Mad Max, the universe, fascinating, and the characters that inhabit that universe. And the same thing goes for Mad Max the game, where I found the characters to be way more interesting than the actual story, because it almost acknowledges that. Plus, it suits better here because it's a video game. It's about how you play the video game, not so much the story, because sometimes games can have really shitty stories, but as long as the gameplay is fun, hey, it's a video game, it did its job. Here, the story is not necessarily shit, but it's rather light. It focuses more on the side characters and makes them much more interesting. One of the first characters you meet is this character named Chum Bucket, who's definitely modeled after Gollum. I mean, Gollum was the first thing that came to mind when it came to this character. However, unlike Gollum, he's less sinister and much more, blindsided by how savage the world can be, because his biggest fascination is with cars. He's a mechanic, and that's his main love in life. He almost doesn't need anything else except cars. And he's just one of the fascinating characters that you get to meet. There's this other character named Hope and her daughter Glory. Yeah, even Max makes a joke about that. He's like, Hope and Glory, cute. I love that they were kind of in on the joke on there. But you meet these other characters that also uh, kind of provide an analysis on Max's own persona, about how maybe he used to have a family and the type of person he used to be before this whole thing happened with the world and the apocalypse. And that makes for some interesting character analysis. And throughout the game, there are moments where the game, it kind of looks at Max and says, hey, what type of person exactly is he? In fact, there's this character named Griffa that you come across in certain points of the map, and whenever you interact with this character, a little cutscene will provide some information on what we see Max as. Even this guy's like, what type of person are you? What exactly, why exactly do you kill the people that are in your way? Or, what happens to those that you spare? And I loved moments like that, because that's practically what Mad Max is all about. Are the characters and the environment, and how crazy the people are, or maybe how crazy Max is for not being as crazy as them. That's one of the things that people have always analyzed about the title Mad Max, and what exactly makes Max mad is the fact that maybe he's not as crazy as everyone else, and crazy is like the new norm, so because he's not insane, that makes him mad in the eyes of everyone else. And for being such a barren, lifeless wasteland, Avalanche managed to make such a very beautiful game. Throughout the game, I would find myself just drive, like, you guys know how much I dislike driving, not only in video games but also in real life. I found myself just driving across this wasteland, even after beating the game and just doing some of the side stuff and some of the stuff that I wasn't even particularly that interested in. I went and did it because I wanted to absorb this environment once more before I had to return this game to GameFly. But before I had to do that, I really wanted to take a look at this wasteland that I've come to enjoy traversing throughout my 40-hour campaign, because just the environments, the lighting, the cinematography, even some of the sound effects of the cars, whether they be just driving alongside the road or crashing into each other, just made for an awesome spectacle. And seeing some of these objects throughout the wasteland, like for example, there's this piece of a submarine here, or there's this other environment where there's this giant tanker just lopsided up against a mountain, or you got these strongholds, these things that definitely belonged in the sea have now been washed up, or there's this area that is just covered in sand. It looks like it's very desolate, but as you approach it, you find out that there's an actual airport underneath the ground, and you navigate through it, and you just see all the little details of a world that used to be. Avalanche knew what they were doing, and definitely focused on bringing that out of the newest generation of consoles, so that they put all their focus there and didn't bother doing any last gen ports, PS3, Xbox 360. They're like, nope, we're not going to focus on that. We're going to dedicate all of our time and effort on making a very beautiful game for the PS4 and Xbox One. And I definitely feel like that paid off, because just this game looks amazing. The detail in the characters, their hair, I know I'm geeking out over tiny things that shouldn't matter all that much when it comes to a video game, but man oh man, just how this game looked, it was beautiful. Which is why the problems within its presentation were all the more apparent, because of how beautiful it was. For one, as much as I complimented the sound effects in this game, one sound effect that kind of rubbed me the wrong way ever so often was the actual voice out of Max. I don't know who the voice actor was, but he was kind of mixed for me. On the positive side, whenever he had some kind of inner monologue going on in his head, whenever he picked up an artifact and he was kind of like talking to himself, or whenever he would just whisper, he sounded cool. He had the Australian accent, but he sounded dark and gritty. He sounded badass. That was cool. But whenever he elevated his voice and he was yelling to a side character or doing something that caused him to need to speak out loud, there was something kind of mongoloidish about his voice. He was like, I need to find the engine. Let's go. We don't have time for this. I know that sounded a little bit Schwarzenegger-ish there, but he sounded very much like a brute, as opposed to how he sounded when he was whispering or he was having some kind of inner monologue. speaking with his Australian accent. He sounded badass. But then when he spoke out loud, he sounded really iffy. And I'm like, what's going on with his voice? And then there were some glitches. I mean, it's come to be expected that ever so often when you get a very beautiful looking game, it's going to come with some glitches. And some of them may be funny. Some of them may be like, oh, okay, whatever. It's fine. You can give them a pass. But here, there were a couple that actually hindered the experience. Now, luckily, most, if not all, the ones that I experienced did not happen in the main campaign. Whenever I actually went through a story mission, I didn't find myself being hindered by these glitches. It was mainly when I was doing some of the side stuff that I noticed certain things that were supposed to happen weren't happening. And that's the thing, is that most of them weren't really apparent, but more so in the programming of the game. A good example was this camp that I was trying to do, and there were these enemies that were supposed to burst through this door, and through this door, after defeating those enemies, I was able to progress inside the camp by going through this door. For some strange reason, those enemies did not come through that door. They came through some other way, so therefore that door was completely shut off. I wasn't able to do anything to break through that door. I used everything. Explosives, my harpoon, everything. I tried my best to get that fucking door open, and it did not happen. And so therefore, that camp was... I couldn't do it. I tried everything. I could not get that camp and dismantle it. I couldn't do it. Because I couldn't go through that door, because that's my only way to progress in this camp and do what I needed to do. But because there was a glitch in the programming and those enemies did not go through that door, I wasn't able to go through. And I even looked up on YouTube like, okay, what am I doing wrong? And sure enough, in the video that I looked up, those enemies burst through that door. And that never happened for me. And I was at a loss for words. I was like, seriously? This is going to happen to me? But I have to count my blessings that didn't happen while I was doing the actual story missions that I kind of need to do to actually beat the game. It was frustrating, and these things would happen ever so often, and fortunately they happened in the side stuff, but still, the fact that I couldn't do those things made for some frustrating times. Now this is Avalanche Studios, who I believe did the Just Cause games, and they got Just Cause 3 coming out, I believe, December of this year. I think that's when this Just Cause 3 is coming out. But anyways, it is a third-person action game that has this combat system, both on foot with Max, as well as with the vehicle combat, because this is Mad Max. You're bound to fight using your vehicle. I mean, that's just the law of the land. So it makes no sense to be able to take that element out of a video game. I mean, it makes for some very interesting, very fun gameplay. So why wouldn't you put that in your game? And fortunately, we find both of those styles of gameplay in this game. And the first one I'll talk about is the actual combat with Max himself, using his fists and his wit to be able to dispatch enemies. And the one game that people are liking the combat style or the combat system in this game too, and because of this, some people find the need to kind of criticize it because they're kind of like mimicking it in a way, and I will admit it's rather similar, is the Arkham games, in which you basically mash the square button or the left face button, depending on what console you're using, to punch your enemies, perform different combos, and then whenever an enemy is about to strike you, a little icon on the top of their head is going to appear, and most of the time it's going to be the top face button. For me, because I'm playing on the PS4, it's the triangle, so whenever it's about to appear, a little thing will appear around it saying you got this amount of time to parry, otherwise he's going to hit you. And if you time it perfectly, you'll deliver a successful parry, and this will lead to building up your meter so that then you can go into Fury mode, and when you go in Fury mode, all of your attacks are a little bit beefed up. You're stronger, and you take less damage whenever you do get punched. And you string together all these different things to be able to take on enemies, so you go from one to another. However, unlike the Arkham games, it's not as spectacular because you're not Batman. You're not jumping from left to right like, oh my god, look at all my gadgets that I'm using, blah blah blah. This is Max. This is Mad Max. So obviously he's just going to be using his fists. He's not going to be bouncing all over the place. So on the one hand, it's a little bit more realistic, but at the same time, it is less flashy than Batman. But what I can say though is that it's very satisfying delivering some of these finishers. When you do a successful combo, or when you're in Fury mode, sometimes little icons will appear allowing you to use shivs to execute your enemies, or perform a ground takedown where you crack their spine or you twist their neck, and just every single time you deliver one of those visceral blows and you just hear the fists or whatever you have over your fists, depending on how much you upgrade max, just crushing an enemy's head or like taking him and pelting him up against the wall is very satisfying. Delivering all those crushing finishers just makes for some really exciting gameplay. My only gripe would be that sometimes the game will get kind of unfair whenever it would just unleash legions of war boys. Sometimes you'll find yourself doing nothing but just parrying over and over, because sometimes enemies will surround you, different forms of enemies, from regular war boys that just use their fists to other enemies that have like these shields and these heavy duty melee weapons that you can also use for yourself should you be able to grab yourself one. And basically, whenever you do get surrounded by a humongous amount of enemies, you'll often find yourself hitting the triangle button, at least for me, the triangle button over and over, and not being able to get an actual legitimate punch in. And when you can't do that, you'll have to rely on your rifle, which I was hoping the use of guns will be used a little bit more, but at the same time I can kind of understand why guns are a little bit barren in this place, considering that what people mainly want in this wasteland is food and water. So obviously guns is not necessarily the focus. I was kind of hoping that a few more guns would have been used, but you do get to use Max's trusty shotgun, and using the right face button is what allows you to be able to use your shotgun. And that's mainly the only actual ranged weapon that you'll use in this game, besides any other melee weapons or objects that you're given the ability to throw. But beyond that, you're able to switch in between punching your enemy and using your rifle, and that's satisfying, but sometimes you need to rely on your rifle when you have all these enemies and all you end up doing is hitting the triangle button over and over. But when that is not happening, the combat eventually does become fun. But why bother using your fists when you can use wheels, an engine, and spikes at the front of your freaking car to impale your enemies? Of course, it wouldn't be a Mad Max game without being able to use your vehicle for combat. I mean, oh my god, this is generally where I legitimately felt like Max, because when I was actually being Max and fighting with my fists, it felt like a brawler, it felt like a beat 'em up. But when using my vehicles and taking that vehicle, upgrading it, giving it weapons, and being able to use my harpoon to tear off the wheels off of the enemy's cars, or even the driver itself, and pull him out from the front of the windshield, or ramming into them T-bone style with the front bumper, or being able to grind into their sides with the little spikes that I have in my tires, and just seeing them explode in the distance with the thunder harpoons that I would launch like so. That's when I genuinely felt like Mad Max. I'm a little embarrassed to admit this, but when there was a sequence where I was driving and all of a sudden these enemies just jumped from the ramps and onto their side, and there I am ramming into one side while at the same time pulling out my harpoon, or my thunder harpoon I should say, and blowing up another so that I can weaken their defenses, their numbers. I was playing music in my head, or actually I was humming the some of the music, some of the soundtrack from the new Fury Road movie. It was like dun, 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 dun. And the design for these cars are very much authentic to the Mad Max universe, whether it be from the old Mel Gibson Mad Max movies or the most recent Fury Road. The way they look with the spikes is very authentic, and it also provides a diverse sense of how this map is divided into sections. You got the dunes where you got all the buzzards, but you got also you got the faction that belongs to Scrotus, his war boys, along with these people that are mainly just trying to survive, but they ended up going bad. Each faction of these cars have a different styles, but every so often you'll find different versions of those styles. They have better upgrades, they have better defenses, so it's up to you to be able to magnify the magnum opus into becoming stronger than they are. And when you do, the vehicular combat becomes even more fun, and nothing becomes more satisfying than destroying just one of their cars, and they recognize how strong you are and how survival of the fittest applies to this land. So when they notice that one of their own just blew up in just one hit, they automatically just run away, like the rest of them just run away, and you have your side character here, Chumbucket, who tags along the entire time with you, so that he's on the back of the car controlling the harpoon, controlling whatever weapons you customize the magnum opus with, and you'll often hear him say, "They're running for their lives, we are legend." Oh my god, that was very satisfying, knowing that I was becoming legitimately the Road Warrior. Now, fortunately, my only slight gripe, unless I'm missing something, was that some of these vehicles, because throughout the wasteland, you can find other vehicles that you can commandeer for yourself, and whenever you drive them to a stronghold, you can then keep that vehicle. Some of these vehicles could even be some of the ones that the enemies use, because sometimes if you are on foot, the enemy, after trying to ram you with their truck, because obviously that's what they're gonna do. But if you evade them enough, they're gonna figure out, you know what, I'm just gonna get out of the car and try to beat this guy to shit. So they get out of their car, you can kill them, and then hijack their car and take it to like a stronghold. You can do that, and then you'll be able to use that car whenever you please. Sometimes these cars, however, have different attributes because they're already kind of preset, and ever so often they didn't handle so well, because sometimes these cars are designed to travel on roads, but then when you try to go through the dunes or you try to take a little shortcut, they don't handle very well. Sometimes I'll end up just running into pillars, into things I did not mean to run into. And sometimes one of these vehicles would end up being the Magnum Opus, and no matter how many upgrades I would give it, in terms of the handling, whether it be changing the tires or changing the suspension, sometimes I would find myself not handling the car very well. Like I said, it might have been just me. Maybe I should avoid going through the sand so much, or maybe just focusing on the roads. I'm open to that being the possibility, but sometimes it was frustrating trying to get this car to go the way that I wanted to, especially during this specific mission where I have to go through this race, and oh my god, the amount of times I would keep hitting the walls. Now, you heard me already mention a couple times about the fact that you're able to upgrade Max and make them stronger, make them much more durable to damage, as well as the Magnum Opus, so that you can then deliver even greater vehicular combat. And that's because the upgrade system for this game is very well made. It's a very involved upgrade system, but very simple to understand. It's not necessarily on RPG level, but it's broad enough to become almost addictive. I'm not gonna lie, I found myself doing so much of the side stuff to be able to upgrade the Magnum Opus as much as I possibly can, and there was a point where I felt like I legitimately maxed out Max. Nope, no pun intended there. But yeah, I did find myself upgrading things so frequently, and I felt addicted to do so because I wanted to feel like the Road Warriors. So upgrading Max is able to be done through not only unlocking certain moves in the pause menu, but also talking to Griffa and spending tokens that you gain from Griffa whenever you rank up in terms of your levels. Like your level, there's these different ranks, and within each rank there's 10 levels. Once you complete each level, you then rise up in the ranks, and every time you level up, you gain a Griffa token that you can then spend on this little wheel that allows Max to be able to boost up his attributes. And some of these attributes include gaining some more water whenever you do find it, or gaining more food whenever you manage to scavenge food, or more scrap that you can then use on the Magnum Opus, or simply boost up your health meter so that you can last longer in combat. And beyond that, you can also upgrade the actual physical things that Max has going for him, such as the gauntlets on his gloves so that he can deliver more damage, or the actual jacket on him so that he's able to receive lesser damage. But more importantly, upgrading the Magnum Opus is where it's at. Now, to do this, you do need to acquire significant amount of scrap, because at first, the first couple of upgrades for almost any kind of category with the Magnum Opus, whether it be the tires or the armor or the bumpers or whatever, it's only like a couple hundred scrap, and you can get that easily. But as you progress, certain upgrades are going to require like 500, 600, maybe even 1,000 scrap. And at first that seemed kind of intimidating, but as you progress and you start to do more of the side stuff, you figure out how you can get rewarded with some more scrap. And like I said, to me it became addictive to do some of this side material so that I can boost up the Magnus Opus, so that I can achieve that level of status, so that when I destroy one convoy, one tiny little car out of this horde of cars that are just charging towards me, and then just seeing them run in cowardice, it's just so satisfying. That's what video games are supposed to do. And I'm very happy to say that Mad Max delivers that in spades. And upgrading the Magnus Opus and Max himself is not necessarily the only thing that I found to be kind of addictive. The side material is also a little bit irresistible. And not only are there these wasteland missions, which are practically the actual essential side missions of this game that actually have to do with some of the characters in the story. You go to them, they give you this mission. I have to admit, some of them are mainly fetch quests, like, hey, go get me this, and I'll reward you, I'll make it worth your while, like most of these characters say. But I did find them somewhat irresistible to do because there was context to them. There was a reason behind it. Plus, the rewards legitimately made them worthwhile. There would be either upgrades for the Magnus Opus or more scrap to be able to upgrade not only the Magnus Opus and Max himself, but also some of these things that you can also do within the Stronghold so that you can get even more benefits. Like there's these little projects within each Stronghold that you visit that if you finish up those projects and you go scavenge for those parts and bring them back and you build that particular little device or little project, then you get some added benefits like whenever you visit that stronghold, your health will be automatically filled up because now you got food there or you got water there, so now you got a filled up canteen, or you got this little oil barrack and now that you got that, whenever you travel to that stronghold, you automatically have a full tank of gas for your car. And this made for some addictive gameplay, and I just couldn't stop doing some of the side stuff. Even when it didn't come to upgrading any of those things, every time I would just pass by this little scarecrow that all you have to do is harpoon it and pull it down, I had to stop and do it. I was like, I gotta do it. The only thing that would turn me away was the fact that I didn't upgrade my harpoon high enough, because as the game progresses, these scarecrows would get tougher and tougher, as well as these snipers that are pushed up on some high towers. And there's just an abundance of side material for you to be able to do in this game, like these camps. There's these oil camps where you have to destroy the little oil derrick, or these other camps where you simply just need to destroy all the enemies there, every time you do this, every time you get rid of a camp and you dismantle it, or you tear down a scarecrow, or you kill a sniper, the threat level in that area will go down. And of course, this kind of gives you material to do so that you can platinum the game, but more importantly, this will also make the game a little bit easier for you, because if the threat level goes down, all the way down to 0, then obviously no enemies are going to inhabit that area. Scrotus' hordes are just going to be gone completely, so traveling from point A to point B will be made a whole lot easier. And if you want to do that so you can do some of the bonus challenges, like to talk to set amount of people in this region or something like that, then you can do that with much better ease. My only little complaint with this is that after a while you start to recognize that some of these models or some of these structures are kind of repeated versions of them. Like for example, whenever you go to this camp and your main objective is to kill what they call a top dog, which is essentially like this boss battle within the camp, you start to recognize that almost every single one of these top dogs is exactly the same type of enemy, only with a brand new skin, a brand new backstory behind this character, but essentially it's the same exact thing. And the actual the actual process of dismantling some of these camps is exactly the same. Like what you need to do first, like destroying the perimeter defenses and then working your way into the camp. The actual process is the same, even though the structure itself and the layout of that camp can be changed up, and that's the only thing that made it fresh for me, and that's the only reason why I was actually motivated to do some of the side stuff even after having completed the game, because after beating it, you are allowed to free roam and go and level up your max, level up your car, and just do all of the side stuff and let the wasteland be your playground. But even though I personally didn't feel dissuaded to do any of this stuff, I can understand why some people may find it a tad bit repetitive, because after a while you start to see the same kind of character models, and like I said, the process to doing all these different things are kind of the same. So I know I've been talking for quite a bit now and I'm on the verge of losing my voice, so I'm just gonna go ahead and wrap this whole thing now. Basically, Mad Max is quite possibly going to become one of the most underrated games of this year. I'm not going to deny that at times it could be repetitive a little bit with not only its side material, but also some of the objectives within the story can become a little repetitive. And I do wish that some of these glitches within the side stuff could have been fixed so that I felt like I could have progressed more with that, and I could have completed just a tad bit more of those camps and more of those things before I had to return the game. But beyond that, this is a Mad Max game that I was glad was not based on the movie, despite its references to the movie. Because if it was, then they would have had to release it around the time that the movie came out, and they would have had to focus only about maybe 6 months to maybe a year of actual development to it. And that definitely could have made for a shitty game, but instead they're like, you know what, let's take our time. In fact, this game I think was supposed to come out last year and it got delayed. And so you can definitely tell that the people behind this game have some kind of affection towards Mad Max. They either love that franchise, or they respect it, or they acknowledge the creativity behind that world, and they decided to bring that kind of attention to detail in over to the video game interpretation of that world. And I'm glad that they did that, because this is legitimately a game that I just couldn't put down. I spent so much time on it, and more so than I was ever expecting to do so, considering the content within it. I mean, I'm blown away by how much I legitimately enjoy this game. So for that, I give Mad Max a high 8 out of 10. I thought it was a really well-made game, good game, and I can definitely see why Avalanche Studios did not back out from the game of chicken that was the release date of September 1st with Metal Gear Solid 5. So let me know what you guys thought of Mad Max. If you have played the game, but if you have not and would like to purchase the game after watching my review, then be sure to use the link in the description below. It would really help me out a lot. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time. I will now be using my voice like this, not only because of Max, but also because I cannot talk anymore.